What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the sophomore albums from new metal bands.
I'm at the end of my...
Alright, I also have some corrections along the way from my debut albums list because there were a few little mistakes and some missing albums on there. And I'm also upping my game. There are only 5 albums per tier is what we're going to do here. That's the challenge. And it was hard, y'all. But let's dive into it. Let's start with a really strong one, shall we? So why don't we go with System of a Down with Toxicity. So I've mentioned before that I personally enjoy the self-titled album a bit more, but obviously, like, this is a landmark album in the genre. This is the album that really put System of a Down on the map, and for good reason. I mean, Chop Suey, like, I remember when that music video aired for the first time, my friends and I were, like, in my friend's basement where we always hung out and just did degenerate shit. And this came on and it was just like a revelation to us, especially as kids who are like trying to make music and being like, whoa, this sounds totally different than anything. And then you've got the title track, you got some of the deeper cuts. There are some kind of like what I'd call filler songs, almost like comedy songs on here, but even those are fun, like Pogo. Like, it's a stupid song, but it's not a bad song either. It's like fun. So consistent album start to finish, very enjoyable, and yeah, definitely belongs at S tier. But there were a couple surprises as I was going through these too, because there were some I had not listened to in a while. And I've got to throw in 40 Below Summer. I don't know if y'all remember 40 Below Summer. They were definitely one of the kind of like lesser known groups, came to the game a little bit later maybe. I was glad to see though that this was their sophomore album, because this is the one I wanted to talk about. It's called Invitation to the Dance, and it's great. Like, this album is legit so much fun. I loved it as a kid, and I was genuinely surprised at how much I still loved it listening to it now. It's definitely corny, especially some of the lyrics. And even like from the first moments, it's like, we the people must jump. But it's like so just peak new metal. And I love every second of it. It's that gets you pumped at the gym kind of music. The song after that, Rope, was also a big one for me that I remembered almost every word to that song. But really, every song in this album has some sort of fun hook on it. Great vocals, too. Like, I love new metal albums and metal albums in general where they vary up the vocal style. There's a lot of variation here. Maybe it should end a few tracks sooner, and that's really the only thing keeping it from S tier for me. But honestly, this is an underrated album. If you've never listened to it before, highly recommend it. And if it's been a while, go back and listen to this album because it's really fun. I want to put it at A tier, and A tier ends up being a pretty interesting one too, I must say. All right, on the flip side, let's grab another one, and I'm cheating a little bit with this one. It's Powerman 5000 with Tonight the Stars Revolt. Technically, this is their third album, and I'm pulling it now because I don't know if I'm going to continue the series into new metal third albums. Maybe I will if people enjoyed enough, because I'm having a fun time doing this. But yeah, I wanted to make sure I included this album in at least one of these videos, because it's got the best new metal song possibly ever on it in When Worlds Collide. I remember hearing that for the first time on Tony Hawk, and just being, it was another like gateway moment for my metal journey, so to speak. But unfortunately, the rest of this album is kind of just like a less interesting version of Rob Zombie. Just doesn't have the same kind of punch to it. The songwriting isn't as great, but it's still fun. It's just kind of forgettable. So it's not quite F tier. It's not in the garbage. I can enjoy listening to this, but I am going to put it at D tier. All right, another one I had not listened to in quite a while was Chimaira with the Impossibility of Reason. And I was more kind of into the debut album, which is one I forgot to include on the debut albums list. Should have included that, because that was another one that first time I heard that was alongside new stuff from like Dark Tranquillity and Meshuggah. And like that was, again, like very important stuff for me to get into this. But yeah, this album is really solid. I kind of forgot that I spent a lot of time listening to this one as well. If I were to rank the first album, probably would put it at a B, maybe even an A, but this album's a little bit different. Feel like it's got a lot of great groove to it, but it's missing some of the more overt like industrial touches that the first album had. There was more kind of like stuff with the sound design and the electronic touches and percussion. This one's a little bit more like thrashier, almost like Fear Factory at times. Lots of great tracks on it though. The Cleansation, the Dehumanizing Process, Overlooked, and then Pure Hatred is just a fucking teen angst anthem. Great track there. Re-listening to this one kind of reminded me a little bit of why I drifted away from this band over time, because it's a good listen. Just again, not as memorable as maybe some of these other albums, but ultimately I enjoyed it more than some of the other albums I thought I was going to enjoy going back to. So more on that. But yeah, I'm going to put this one at B tier. Let's throw another classic on the board here, though, with Slipknot and Iowa. What more can be said about this album that hasn't already been said? Again, I kind of prefer the debut overall, but Iowa is a fantastic follow-up, and they're both basically S-tier albums for me. I'm going to put it at S-tier. I'd put it a little bit above Toxicity to just heavy album, and so many like great vocal call-out moments. Again, like corny adolescent writing, but the delivery of it just makes it so much fun to just rage to with the 555 and a 6. Like, that is a stupid line, but Corey just makes it work, and the whole band brings it all together. Left Behind, the drums on that, like, Jesus. The hooks, incredible album. Definitely another like very formative one for me, and the last Slipknot album that I like really love. All right, this might be a controversial one. We've got Disturbed with Believe. Now, when I did the debut album ranking, I was wondering if people get mad at my ranking of The Sickness. I forget exactly where I put it. I think it was around like C tier. I've never been a big Disturbed fan. I've always thought they were kind of overrated. I appreciate what they did with some of their instrumental elements and some of the vocal stuff, but they were never a band I got into, but I did have at least one or two comments saying like, oh, Believe is where they got really good. So it had been a long time since I'd listened to this one, went back to it, and I still dislike it just as much as I did when it came out. Which is funny because I liked a lot of like corny, not so great stuff back then, but this album I just think is supremely overrated. I think in particular what turned me off on this album to begin with was the lead single. I believe the lead single was Prayer, and I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but Prayer, I'm sure unintentionally, I doubt it was on purpose, but jacked the vocal hook from Livin' La Vida Loca.
Another dream that will never come true, just a compliment, no sorrow. Push and pull you down, living the vida loca.
You can't unhear that. You're welcome. And not even that one, though. Like, I don't really care for any of the singles on this album, and the deeper cuts are even more forgettable. Like, I've already forgotten everything except for that vocal hook now after revisiting it. And I had heard it quite a few times back in the day. So I'm going to put this one at C tier. I know it might be beloved by some of you, but if it's been a while since you listened to it, I encourage you to check it out again and actually see if you still feel the same way, if you just have nostalgia goggles. But there are worse albums on here, believe me. Let's go with Drowning Pool with Desensitized. Like, I already talked a bit and ranked the debut album pretty low, but that album, like, I can have fun with. Like, I don't think it's a good album, but I enjoyed listening to the first Drowning Pool album. Maybe even a little bit more than I enjoy listening to Disturbed, honestly. But this album's just bad. Like, that album cover kind of just says it all for me. These songs are just awful. Just really bad. This one goes at F tier for sure. Back on the positive side with a somewhat deeper cut that people were upset was not on the first one. We've got the sophomore album from American Head Charge, The War of Art. Another one where I was glad to see that this is the sophomore album. There's a couple bands on these lists that have debut albums that I wasn't even aware of. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know about that one. I always thought this was the debut album, but it's not. This is the second album. Great album. This is a banger with an industrial metal twist, which y'all, if you're regular listeners, know I enjoy that. So another one with like lots of great gym cuts on it to really get your blood pumping, like a violent reaction, pushing the envelope, never get caught, seamless, just like pure rage. Vocals that, but never get caught. Like, again, corny, but love it. I love that stuff. Like, I love me some, like, proggy, complex thinking music and mathcore and, like, really powerful stuff, but I also love me some really dumb caveman shit when it's done just right, and this is one of those albums. I honestly like this one better than Static X's Machine, which we haven't gotten to yet, in this style, for that, like, new metal industrial kind of fusion. The one issue with this album is length. It is over an hour, and it definitely could have been trimmed significantly, especially, again, the last few tracks. It's got a similar problem as Invitation to the Dance. But it's really impressive how it holds my attention regardless, so I'm also going to put this one at A tier. Like I said, A tier is a very interesting tier full of very different and albums I would say maybe not a lot of other people would pick. All right, next up, let's grab Head PE with Broke. I used to love this album. Like, I had so much fun with it, and I do enjoy the music on this still. I love the funky elements of it and how unique it sounds compared to pretty much any other album on this list. But damn, are these lyrics embarrassing. Like, I already mentioned this. I kind of alluded to it on the previous video. But this is the album where they, like, go all in with the misogyny, and it's pretty bad, y'all. And understand, like, I have a very non-PC dark sense of humor. So I feel like for me to say this album genuinely makes me uncomfortable listening to tracks like Bartender and Crazy Legs kind of says something. Like, I'll bet I'd be interested to hear the vocalist talk about this, because he's kind of like, he's sober now. He does like charity work for like addiction and stuff like that. So I'm wondering how he feels looking back on this album that's all about just sex and drugs and debauchery. But man, it was hard to re-listen to it. It's still kind of fun. I'll admit, it's still kind of fun. So I'm going to put it at C tier, actually, at like the bottom of C tier. It's like a C minus. The music saves it because it's still fun and kind of bouncy to listen to, but those lyrics, man, it's hard to get past them. But there are far worse albums on here, one of them being Saliva with Every 6 Seconds. Now, Click Click Boom, great track, like really fun. I shouldn't say great, but like anthemic, really fun, memorable radio track from this era. And Your Disease is also pretty fun, but the rest of this album is so bland and so generic and just so, I get nothing from it. It was a D tier originally, but I'd drop it below. Like, Powerman 5000 is forgettable, but it's fun while I'm listening to it. Saliva, like, was a chore to even get through. So yeah, F tier. All right, back to the great albums, though. Sevendust's Home was another album I had not listened to in a very long time. And man, some of those tracks were just hiding in the back of my brain somewhere, and I forgot how genuinely good this album was. Like, I was messaging back and forth with Chris, who you can check out his written reviews on metaltrenches.com for all sorts of great new music and albums. But man, like, there is not a bad track on this thing, and Lejon, what a great vocalist. Like, I gotta say, one of the best, maybe like top 5, maybe top 3, like, nu metal vocalists of all time, I would say. He's just got so much power, and I love the alternations with the aggressive, harsh vocals and his singing, which is just so fantastic. You got some major bangers on here with Waffle and Denial, which were definitely the ones that I remembered the most from back in the day. Really fun with those. And then you've got Blender at the end with Chino Moreno of the Deftones. And I forgot all about that. So when that came on, I was like, oh, what a great way to cap this thing off. So yeah, this one has to be S tier. Looking forward to spending more time re-listening to that one. Back to the bad, we've got Orgy with Vapor Transmissions, and another band where I love the debut. Like, I have a lot of fun with the first album, unironically, but I remember when this one came out, I was very disappointed with it. It's not terrible, but it's a serious drop in quality from the debut. There's lots of like really corny melodic songs that I feel like they're really leaning into the sort of like teen girls who shop at Hot Topic demographic, and hey, if that's what works, good for them. The song Opticon is fine, but even that isn't as strong a single as anything off of the debut. I'm gonna put this one at D tier. All right, so another thing that some people commented that I omitted on the debut list was Rob Zombie. I'm always kind of on the fence as to whether I feel like he's fully nu metal. Like, he kind of is, and I always lean more towards he's just kind of straight up industrial metal. But there's definitely those nu metal elements. So to appease that crowd, I included them on this list with the Sinister Urge. Now, regardless of all that, it's a good album. I wouldn't say it's as strong as Hellbilly Deluxe, which is just like a powerhouse in terms of like a time capsule of that time period. And I talked a lot about Dragula on the Matrix soundtrack. But not enough punch to some of the other songs, I would say. I do enjoy Feel So Numb and Scum of the Earth, but it's a little bit kind of like a little too even keel, but still more enjoyable than most of the lower tier albums on this list, so I'm going to put it at B tier. Back to the almost confusingly bad, we got Mushroomhead with Superbuick, another really bad early and mostly forgotten album for this band. Like, you hear people talk about Mushroomhead, you don't hear a lot of people bringing up Superbuick. Like, when I was looking at their discography, I was surprised to find some of these, because I was like, I never even heard of this. Like, I definitely started to get into them more with the album covers that have them with like the masks on the cover, and they're really leaning into that nu metal element. But yeah, this one, the vocals are just absolutely terrible. Like, just unlistenable, I would say, and the music isn't much better. And then what's even more upsetting and embarrassing is that certain tracks like These Filthy Hands sound like they're going for kind of a Faith No More thing, and they just... Faith No More is fantastic, and Mike Patton is like the GOAT, so don't even try. Don't even try unless you're really prepared to bring your A game. And then they use a sample from Twin Peaks on one of the tracks too, which is just... stop it. So yeah, F tier for this one. Just awful. Jumping around some more, we got Linkin Park with Meteora. This may be another controversial one, because I know a lot of people love this album. They put it right up there with Hybrid Theory in terms of their top albums. I agree that, like, in terms of their discography, this is probably my second favorite, but it's a pretty significant drop for me. Like, this album's okay. And going back to and re-listening to it, I was kind of like, okay, maybe this will be the time where I kind of see what everybody else sees and really elevate it up into the higher tiers, maybe even S tier. But I was still kind of underwhelmed with it. Like, it's got some good songs on it. Somewhere I Belong, Faint, Numb, but those don't really reach the same heights to me as Crawling and In the End. And then the deeper cuts are like much more forgettable. Like Hybrid Theory, I love every song, genuinely, and really have a blast still listening to that album. And this one's just okay. Again, more solid than a lot of the other stuff on this list. I'm going to put it at B tier, but I don't think it deserves to be an A or S. And I know it may be crazy to see 40 Below Summer and American Head Charge above Meteora, but that's just how I feel. All right, probably the biggest omission from the previous list was Coal Chamber. Like, there is no excuse for me forgetting to include their self-titled album. And I own all their albums, and they were also among the albums I probably listened to the most back at that time. So I don't know how I managed to do that. There were just so many albums on the list, so I apologize. I will say the debut has not aged very well, going back to it. Kind of like Head PE. Not as bad, though. But I would probably put the debut at like C tier, maybe even D tier, because it's got some bangers like Loco and Big Truck, but there's a lot of filler and a lot of, again, like embarrassing stuff. Like A Mirror from the Desert is just, ugh. Like, what are we even doing? It was a different time. So, yeah, I prefer chamber music. Like, I think chamber music, pound for pound, is a better album. The Shock the Monkey track with Ozzy is definitely corny, but I don't hate that track, and everything else I really enjoy. I love the opening with the strings. I love Tyler's song. I love the opening track. There's a lot to really enjoy on here. And continuing the trend of having a very interesting A tier, that's where I'm going to put this one. Like, I really still enjoy this album. Let's throw another surprise on here with Kittie and Oracle. And so this was an album I did enjoy listening to early on, and I was surprised at how much I disliked it going back to it. I remember this album being a whole lot better, but now I actually prefer Spit. I thought this album was better than Spit before, but no, like, I did not enjoy re-listening to this album. Like, it's genuinely, it's not good. It's definitely not good. I originally had it placed around like B tier, I want to say, but it dropped all the way down to D tier. Like, there wasn't really a song on it that I still enjoyed. It almost went to F, but there are worse albums on this list. And again, we're only doing 5 per tier, so that's just the way it's going to be. All right, another deeper cut here. We got Spineshank with The Height of Callousness. Didn't really enjoy their debut album in the first list, but this is the one that I remember, and I feel like most people remember. And it's a solid time. I was kind of hoping this would be like 40 Below Summer, where I'd really love it, but it was just okay. Like, it was a solid listen, nothing particularly bad on it, but nothing like greatly memorable on it as well. I think New Disease in particular, but yeah, I could kind of take it or leave it. Not terrible, not great. I'm going to put it in C tier. All right, another powerhouse that needs to be talked about. We've got Limp Bizkit with Significant Other, and this is like, if somebody asks you what is new metal, I feel like you give them this album. Like, this is one of those albums that you just hand out, and regardless of what you think of Limp Bizkit or Fred Durst or whatever, like, the musicianship here is just beyond reproach, I would say. Like, Wes is the master of just taking a really simple groove and turning it into the most catchy, infectious thing you've ever heard, which is why they had so much crossover and why they were so important to bringing in new fans to metal. This has got like all the best hits on it. You got Rollin', you got Break Stuff, which is still a regular listen to me while driving. So much fun. I've gone on and on about this album in other videos, so I'll cut it short here. You can check out my Limp Bizkit tier list too to hear my thoughts on all their albums, but it's easily their best and belongs in the S tier of new metal sophomore albums. All right, so another potentially controversial one, Papa Roach with LoveHateTragedy. I'm cheating again here because this is their third album technically. I already included Infest on the debut albums list, and that was another one where I was incorrect. That is not their debut album. It was definitely like their big breakout album, but they had an album before that. But I'm just going to continue in the order that I was on and talk about this one and just leave it at that. And if I have to double up and you all say you want another video, let me know down in the comments. If you want me to go to third albums, I'll just include it again. That's fine. But Papa Roach, not a big fan. Infest is a classic. I remember every word to that album because I owned it on CD and I spent a lot of time listening to it. But I was kind of done after that. I I don't love that album, and I don't like the like radio rock and now like butt rock approach that they've taken now. I just can't stand it. Never liked it. But I'm not going to put it in D and F because I do think it's a better album. It's a more listenable album, better produced album, better written album than some of the stuff in the bottom tiers here. So I'm just going to put it at C alongside Disturbed. And I know some people would rank this much, much higher, but I just do not enjoy this more kind of like radio rocky side of new metal. All right, another one I wasn't too surprised about, but we've got Mudvayne with The End of All Things to Come. And I wasn't surprised about this one because I just listened to it not long ago when I did my Mudvayne tier list, and I still feel basically the same way. Like, to me, when it comes to Mudvayne, LD50 is just where it's at. Like, there's a reason that made S tier on the debut albums list. This one's just okay, and kind of like Meteora in Linkin Park. I feel like this is a significant drop in quality where I don't really enjoy a whole lot of it. Like, Silenced makes for a really fun, angsty intro with that whole like, middle finger is the flag that I wave when I'm silenced. Like, that's fun to scream along to. That one feels like it could have fit on LD50, honestly. Not Falling is also great, but it always just reminds me of the movie Ghost Ship now. Perversion of Truth is also decent, but I never liked Trapped in the Wake of a Dream. I remember even complaining about that song when the album came out to my friends who were all like, oh yeah, this album's sick, and I was the one who was like, I don't know, man, it's okay. But yeah, it's decent. It's more enjoyable to listen to than a lot of these other albums, so I'm going to put it at B tier. Let's grab another bad one. We've got Dry Kill Logic with The Dead and the Dreaming. Just a very kind of bland, forgettable album that I've already like forgotten everything from. I think people enjoyed, I'll just put it in F tier. People enjoyed The Darker Side of Nonsense, which I feel like is the album they're most known for. Another album I forgot to include on the debut albums tier list. Maybe one day I'll redo it and fix some of these errors that I made. But yeah, this one just doesn't hold up, doesn't live up, doesn't have a whole lot to offer, so it's the bottom for me. All right, I thought we were ready to do Break the Cycle on this one, but another one I messed up on in the debut albums list is Stained, because I forgot that they have that first album like Tormented or whatever, and I did Dysfunction, so I'm just going to do Dysfunction again. And this album, it's fine. It's fine. It's got Mud Shovel, which is great. I enjoy listening to it. It's not like a revelation. It's not the best album ever, but there's some pretty good, like, chunky riffs, and I like that atmosphere. Like, Stained back in the day brought this really dark, just decrepit atmosphere that was kind of unmatched and really depressing. Just super depressing albums that I enjoyed listening to quite a bit. So yeah, I think I'm going to put this one at C tier, and actually pretty high up on C tier, because I enjoy listening to it more than these other ones. All right, let's go with another one that's a little bit higher, and we've got Korn with Life is Peachy. And I really love the first 4 Korn albums. To me, they're the best. I just did my Korn tier list not all that long ago when Requiem came out, so you can watch that if you haven't already. This, I feel like, of the first 4 is probably the weakest, because it's got the most kind of like lame tracks on it. It's got, you know, that one song, you know the one. Adidas has a great riff, but it's like not the best like writing of their career by any means. I hate the Lowrider cover. Like, I already dislike that song to begin with. So there's a bunch of duds on here, but also some really great classics. So I think it's got a legendary status, and I enjoy listening to it a lot despite the problems. So I'm still going to put it at A tier, especially in comparison to the other albums on this list. But yeah, not S tier for me. All right, let's go with Taproot and Welcome. And as I mentioned on the debut albums list, I love Gift. I think it's like one of the best underrated gems of nu metal, period. And this was another one I was super disappointed when this came out. Because Poem, the lead single, maybe some of you love that song. I hate that song. I just think it's so obnoxious in that chord. This song is a poem to myself. Like, so irritating. I hate that. I don't really like Mine, I think, was the other single. And it's just, no. I don't like it. It's not terrible. I like it more than some of these other albums in F, but I am going to put it at D tier. Don't care for it. All right, Static X with Machine, which I alluded to earlier. Another one I love, Wisconsin Death Trip, S tier debut album, but this one just doesn't do it for me. It's kind of in this weird kind of transitional zone, as Chris put it, and I agree. It's got some decent songs. I remembered the music video for Cold, where his like girlfriend's turned into like a vampire and he's like hiding out in his house or whatever. And then In a Bag is literally about, to my understanding, like taking a shit in a bag and throwing it out the tour bus window, like when, you know, duty calls and that's just something you have to do. Yeah, this album's fine. In fact, it's enjoyable. But it's not like up here. And I couldn't remember, like I remembered that I didn't like it as much as Wisconsin Death Trip, and I still feel the same way now. It's not bad, not great, but better than C tier. So I'm going to kind of put it again in that zone with like Linkin Park's Meteora and Mudvayne's The End of All Things to Come. I'll slide Chimaira up a little bit further, because I think that's a better album, honestly, than any of these. Then we have Dope with Life. And I love their debut too. I don't love their debut, but I enjoy their debut. I do not enjoy anything after that. This is where they also take kind of like a corny turn for like more rock and alternative in their sound, and I just don't think it works. It makes the corny elements that were already there stand out even more, because at least before they had the like heavy industrial stuff to kind of like make up for it and make it still headbangable. But here, it's just cringe. There is no redeeming quality. I was checking out a few tracks to remind myself, because I owned this album and the one after it, I'm ashamed to say, and listened to it a lot. But re-listening, I was like, ugh, how did I like this? This is just terrible. I am not going to quite put it at F tier, though, because, again, 5 per tier, and I have albums worse than this, so I'm going to put it at close to the end of D tier. Rounding out my A tier, to keep things, again, interesting and all these albums sounding very different, we've got Soulfly with Primitive. Love the debut, love Primitive. To me, those are easily the 2 best Soulfly albums. You've got Back to the Primitive with all that awesome groove. You got the corny but fun, throw your hands in the air and headbang, jump the fuck up with Corey Taylor from Slipknot. You've got Pain with Chino coming back from Deftones again. Lots of fun guest appearances, just like the other one. Maybe even stronger on this one. You even got John Lennon's son Sean on Sun Song, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album. It's got that super infectious groove. And then Sean's clean, kind of drifty, sleepy vocals contrasted with Max's staccato, vocal, aggressive performance on the chorus is just chef's kiss. Love this album. Definitely belongs at A tier. All right, coming down to the end here, let's do our last F tier album. And I wonder if you can guess what it's going to be. Like, see if you can guess. Sophomore album that's just terrible. It's got to be Trapt. Like, obviously, this had to be on here. Some people are like, oh, I like this when it came out. No, when Headstrong came out, I was immediately, I cringed deeply before I even knew what the word cringe was. Like, deep inside. Bank up, take you on. You want to watch the best video in the world on Trapt 2? Watch the Needle Drops video, ranking albums when the new album came out, and he's just ranking this album over and over again. Oh, it is a joy to watch that. F tier, easily the worst, I'd say the worst album on here. I think I'd rather listen to any other album on this list than that one. And that leaves our final album for S tier, and see if you can guess this one too, especially if you know me and my tastes. It's got to be Deftones, Around the Fur. Fantastic album. I'd say my all-time favorite out of all these. Iowa is a very close second, but Deftones just always does it for me. They rarely let me down, and this has some classics on it, absolutely. Like, I already enjoyed Adrenaline, but this is where they really fully form into like their sound and the direction that they're going. You've got My Own Summer. You've got one of my all-time favorite Deftones tracks, Be Quiet and Drive. There is not a bad moment on this album. It's just fantastic, and they only get better from there. Some would disagree with that. Some say this is their best album, but definitely S tier, top of the pack nonetheless. Neil, that was a lot. Let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these albums? Check out this video for my top 10 new metal albums of all time, and check out this playlist for even more rankings and videos on new metal. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.